It's really hard for me to talk about Skyrim because one of the previous games in the series, Morrowind, is kind of one of my favorite games of all time. It kind of changed the way I thought about RPGs and video games in general. And I think for a lot of people, Skyrim is going to be the same way. It kind of came in at a time when we hadn't had a game like that in a while, and I think there were a lot of people who were too young to have played Morrowind when it came out, and I think Skyrim fits that same mold for them. But for me, it pales in comparison in so many ways to Morrowind. So, in the course of this video, I'm going to end up comparing it to Morrowind in a lot of different aspects. And if you haven't played Morrowind, I don't know if a lot of these comparisons are going to make sense to you or if you'll even care. And that's fine. But this is my perspective as someone who loved this series so much, and now I really don't feel like it's lived up to the potential it had 10 years ago. And I think the best place to start with this comparison would be the very beginning of the game. So in Skyrim, you start the game and you are in this wagon, and there is this cutscene happening. And it's introducing you to the main conflict in the story, it's introducing you to the world, it's introducing you to how cutthroat everything is because you're on your way to an execution, and there's this sense of drama. And this goes on for a while, and you're listening to people talk, and then you arrive in this town. And you and the people with you get off the wagon, and you basically line up to be executed. And once it's your turn, they ask you, "Who are you?" Which is kind of a weird question in this context, but it's basically exactly what Morrowind does. And then you create your character. And I want to compare that with Morrowind because it should be noted that after this introductory sequence in Skyrim, you have another, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes of tutorial, basically. It's like a tutorial dungeon. And so every time you create a character, well, because like in Oblivion, the game between these two, you could actually save right at the end of the tutorial dungeon, and then it would let you change everything that you had picked at that point, which was a really good way of doing it. It's not perfect, because you still have to go through that really lengthy, boring tutorial dungeon, but it's better than what Skyrim offers you. But, okay, so in Morrowind, you are on a boat, and you're a prisoner. And there's a guy there, and he says, "Oh, I heard them say we reached Morrowind, I'm sure they'll let us go." And then a guy comes over, and he says, "Okay, let's go." From that point onward, there's no tutorial dungeon. All you're doing is, he asks you what your race is, you pick your race, and then you go into this census office, and there's a guy there, and he actually walks you through this conversation which kind of establishes your character as a person with a history. You know, you're answering questions, they're like moral questions, and you're picking a class, and you're picking what sign you were born under. And through this whole process, you're kind of molding this character into what you will be playing as for the rest of the game. And I think that's awesome. In Skyrim, all you're doing is picking your race. That's it. And that's a huge bummer to me because I feel like when I play these games, I want to be a character in this world. In Skyrim, you're not really a character in this world. And I think one of the things that shows that best is when you're going through the tutorial dungeon, your hands are bound. And then there's this guy that's leading you through this dungeon, and he's like, "Here, I'll cut your wrist ropes." And then he just kind of flicks his knife at you, and your hands just kind of become unbound. And they don't show any of that. It doesn't feel like you're actually a character. Even though you can click on the button and then you're looking at your character in the world, it never feels like you inhabit this place. You can go stand on fire, you can just kind of climb up mountains all diagonally, it's really weird. And that problem extends through to the character creation. Because in Morrowind, you had a set of skills that were based on your class, and the only way to level up was to increase these skills. So it kind of forced you to specialize. It forced you to be really good at something. In Skyrim, that doesn't exist. You are encouraged to basically become a master of every single thing in the world. I guess that might add longevity to the game, and it might like, you've got a power trip, you want to be the best at everything. And that's cool, but it never felt like I was crafting my character to be what I wanted him to be, or her to be, as the case is. I usually play a thief type character, a ranger. And I did that in this game, in Skyrim, except it was just as easy for me to just start shooting fireballs at someone or something. And that's another thing, is they've reduced all the skills to a smaller number of skills. So I like to use a dagger, but what's the advantage of using a dagger if swords fit into the same category, they do more damage, and I still level up that same skill by using them? That doesn't really fit in with me as a thief, because why would a thief have like a big sword that he's sneaking up on people with? But there's no reason in the game not to use the sword over the dagger, except that the dagger is like slightly faster, but it doesn't matter because the game isn't that hard to begin with. You're basically trying to make it as quick as possible to kill everyone because you can do so. Okay, and then in Morrowind, not to go back a ways, but once you're out of that census office, you have free reign to go wherever you want. And that's kind of how it is in Skyrim too, but you have to go through that lengthy process of here's how you pick things up, here's how you swing your sword. Morrowind had something like that, sort of. It had a very easy dungeon right outside of the starting town, Satanin. And you could go there, and there were bandits to fight, and they used magic, which you hadn't seen up to that point. And you could go through there, and there was loot. But that's just something off the beaten path, and you can kind of learn about that in town from people. In Skyrim, it's just this railroaded thing, and it's very bombastic. There's a dragon that comes down and attacks you, and you have to like jump. You learn how to jump by jumping between buildings, and it just kind of feels ridiculous. Okay, so that's the very beginning of the game. And then you get out into the world. As in every Elder Scrolls game, there's a main quest line you can do, there's side quests you can do, and there are these guilds you can go to. This is maybe my biggest problem with Skyrim, is that on a general level, none of the quests are very interesting, but the way they handle the Thieves Guild in particular really rubbed me the wrong way. And that's because I love, like I said, I love making thief characters, and you can do a lot of cool things with that idea. In Oblivion, you actually stole one of the Elder Scrolls at the end of the quest line, which was awesome. In Skyrim, okay, so when you start out, you go to the town where the Thieves Guild is, and it's basically this entire town built around there being a Thieves Guild there, which is ridiculous. And then when you get there, the guard is like, "You've come to the home of the Thieves Guild." And it's ridiculous, because why would you ever tell someone where your Thieves Guild is? And also, you still have to go through these sewers to get to it. Like, they hide it, even though the guard is announcing to you when you get there that the Thieves Guild is here. It drives me crazy. And then the quest line for the Thieves Guild is, well, it's written extremely poorly to begin with. It's all these like betrayals that don't make any sense and everything. But the actual things you're doing within these missions never feel like you're a thief. You never feel like you're stealing something. You're never stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. You're like poisoning mead so that the owner of a brewery will get like arrested, and then they just give it to the guy next to you who also works for the Thieves Guild. So then you have like a brewery, and then there's like this ancient god who wants to kill everyone, and you're like part of this secret clan, and it's kind of ridiculous. Whereas in Morrowind, you were like taking jobs from people in bars, basically. All these seedy characters, and it was like drug running and stealing from like, higher ups. It was fun, and it's exciting because you feel like you can't just go through there and wail on everybody with your sword and feel like you did a good job, which is what you can do in Skyrim. And then, even if I was like leader of the Thieves Guild, I can still go be leader of the Warriors Guild, or leader of the Mages Guild, or all of them. Because there's no, like in Morrowind, when you wanted to progress through the ranks of a guild, like the Mages Guild, you would have to increase those skills. You would have to be better at magic in order to move up the ranks, because it wouldn't make any sense for someone who is only good at stealing stuff to be leader of the Mages Guild. And in Skyrim, it's just kind of, okay, here's your quest line, and you'll kind of get better at the stuff you need to do, I guess, if you need to. Like, there's no real reason in the Thieves Guild questline to get better at the skills associated with that type of character. It just so happens that I was using my bow and arrow the whole time. But you don't need to. You could go in there with, like, I'm summoning flame atronarchs and they're killing everybody, and it would still do the same thing. There's no there's no accountability to it. It's really weird, and that kind of contributes to that feeling I get that your character isn't an actual entity in this world. But I guess saying that, we should talk about the main quest line, which is that you are the chosen one, and there's an apocalypse happening, and you have to stop the apocalypse. And that's kind of cool. And I see what they were trying to do, because there's these dragons, and you'll just be wandering around, and all of a sudden a dragon will swoop by. And this is awesome at the start, because the first dragon you fight is this like epic battle out in this field with these like watchtowers, and there's all these people shooting like bows and arrows. They're shooting their flaming arrows at the dragon, and it's swooping down and it's breathing fire on everything, and it's awesome. And like Bethesda did the same thing in Fallout 4, I feel like, where very early in the game they give you this giant enemy, and they kind of give you the tools to fight this enemy that you normally wouldn't have. But I think the way it's handled in Skyrim is so much better, where that power is coming through you having other people there. Whereas in Fallout 4, they just put you in this piece of armor with a giant gun that doesn't run out of ammo, and you just kind of wail on it for a while. And there's no drama in the Fallout 4 fight. There is drama in the Skyrim fight, and it's really effective. And so after you defeat that first dragon, you kind of run into more dragons, and you absorb their souls when you defeat them. It's cool up to the point where you become strong enough to just kind of cheese the AI, and like I can just use my bow and arrow, peek out from a corner and shoot an arrow at it, and do that about 6 or 7 times, and the dragon's done. And none of the drama is there anymore. It's still cool to see all the NPCs kind of, you know, freak out because there's a dragon, and like run for cover or start shouting at it or shooting bows and arrows. It's cool, but it doesn't feel like the apocalypse that I feel like they wanted it to feel like. It just kind of feels like there's this kind of tough enemy I have to fight. And then, okay, so the main quest line is you having to defeat all these dragons, basically. Because there's this aspect to it where you are the Dragonborn, which means you can use your voice as a power. And it's really it's really dumb, because they, on one of the loading tips, they have like, they're explaining to you what a shout is, and they're saying, dragons, when a dragon is breathing fire, it's really, it's talking, and they're having verbal arguments. And it's like, I don't know, I think that's really funny. It's like a 5-year-old describing what the dragons are actually just arguing with each other when they're shooting fire and ice blasts. And I don't know, it's it kind of cracks me up. But so you have this power, and you can go like Fusroda, and then you like shoot, you know, an energy vortex out of your mouth or whatever. And that doesn't ever really go anywhere. I mean, it's kind of fun to do, and it's cool to do it in like a city, and everybody's like, oh my god, the Dragonborn is back, and that's cool. And you can go up to this part of the main quest, is you go up to this tower, and there's all these monks, and they teach you how to use your powers in a very video gamey fashion, where it's like, here's how you sprint using the power of your voice. Now sprint through these gates as we open them. And then the next dungeon you do, there's a section where you have to sprint through gates when they open. And it's like, okay, I get it, it's a video game. And the problem, I guess, is that you are the Dragonborn, but nothing separates you from, you know, Joe Schmo who killed you in the last dungeon, except that you can kind of yell at people forcefully. And again, it doesn't feel like you're actually a part of this world, because there's all this responsibility and power placed on you, and none of it really comes through in the gameplay, because you can still get killed by a bear out in the woods because he snuck up on you or whatever. And, oh, I ran out of arrows. Now I'll just shoot ice at this bear. It's this weird thing they've put themselves in where You need to feel like you are the most powerful being in this world because you are the only one who was able to defeat the dragons. But also there needs to be some kind of challenge so a bandit can still kill you. And it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it like that, because I just defeated a dragon and then this bandit just kind of shot some arrows at me and I'm dead. And they do the thing that Oblivion did and Morrowind did, to be fair, where enemies kind of scale with you. So as you get higher level, they'll have better armor in dungeons, and bandits will wear better armor and soldiers will wear better armor, yada yada yada. I guess you have to do that at some point, but you could also structure the game in such a way that enemies who are more difficult are somewhere else and you don't go there until you're strong enough, and if you do, you'll get killed, which would make more sense, I guess, but not an easy problem to fix. And then just the world itself, I guess, is something to talk about, because in a lot of ways, I think it's one of the more well-constructed and beautiful worlds Bethesda has made. Even, I think this game looks better on just a basic level than Fallout 4 did. Fallout 4 looks like garbage. Skyrim has an attention to detail to it, and a scope, and a kind of aesthetic that is very well realized. Like when you come out of the first dungeon and you're kind of wandering around the woods a little bit, there's fish jumping in the river and there's butterflies, and you can actually catch those and use them as ingredients in alchemy, which is weird, but it just feels like, because as you venture north, it gets colder, it gets snowier, the people change, the buildings change, the environment itself changes, and that's really cool. And I really liked Skyrim's world. It's fun to explore. I think Morrowind was more interesting. I think it had more variety. But I think Skyrim is a huge step up from Oblivion. And I think it's right up there with Morrowind in terms of the world. And one of my favorite parts, and this plays right into the character, and then this is something I think they actually did better than Morrowind as far as character creation goes, is in Morrowind you chose the astrological sign your character was born under when you created your character. And that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, really. But in Skyrim, the signs are actually these standing stones, and you can go up to them and activate them. And you can only activate one at a time. So if you want to activate the thief stone and level up your thief skills faster, you can do that until the point when you want to do something else, and then you can activate that other stone. And because you can fast travel wherever you want, it becomes this really elegant, cool system where you can kind of use that to grow your character as you see fit. And that's really cool. And it's really cool because you can actually see the light shooting out of the stone towards the constellation that it's associated with. And that's like one of the best ideas in the game, I feel like. That's like really smart. And I guess I should talk about the combat, because one of the main things that people say about Morrowind is that its combat was poor. And if you play it like a normal game, I would agree wholeheartedly, because your swings are based on, and even your spells are based on, like, stats. So if you're just swinging and you don't have any stamina, and your sword skill isn't very high, you're not going to hit the enemy. And that looks kind of ridiculous to someone who doesn't realize that's what's happening, because you'll just be swinging at a rat for 5 minutes and nothing will happen. What they've done in Skyrim is thrown that entire system out, where every time you swing, you're hitting something. And I'm sure that's more satisfying on a basic level for someone who hasn't, you just want to get in and you want to kill stuff. And I get that. But what that's done is just kind of trivialized combat in a huge way, because you can just kind of circle strafe around somebody and keep hitting the right trigger and they'll die. And because every single hit hits, you just kind of see their health bar slowly, notching down by every hit you do. That's not fun either. Like, it's more fun that every hit is hitting, but you never feel like you're like either you're just like slaughtering dudes in 2 hits, or you're just kind of like wailing on them, and it's just a bummer. Like, the combat is terrible. It's so boring, and it never changes, and you never feel like you're getting stronger, because you could kill stuff in 2 hits at the beginning of the game, and you could still kill stuff in 2 hits at the end of the game. And it's cool that you can have like a sword in one hand, magic in the other, but the way you change between the two is kind of clunky, and you can like favorite stuff, and then if you want to actually change something, you have to go into the inventory, which is this huge mess. This is one of the worst inventory screens I've seen, because again, in Morrowind you had a grid, and a grid is much easier to sort through, look through, and use than a list is, especially a list where only the main object is displayed on the screen. So if you have something at the bottom of the list, you have to scroll through that entire list. If you had a grid, you could just go straight to it. And I understand why it's a list, because they're on consoles now, and a grid would be, I guess, harder to use. It really wouldn't be if you think about it, because you could just move the cursor along the grid. You know, you could just have an item highlighted in the grid, and then you hit right on the thumbstick, and then the next object is highlighted, or you could scroll through them. I don't really understand what the list is doing here. I know they display the object for you, which is useless in almost every situation. There is a minor puzzle where you have to look at the bottom of something, and that's like the only time you ever use that feature in the game. It's just, the inventory is a mess. The whole interface, it looks very good. The whole interface is unified throughout the whole game, so the maps look like the inventory does, and your character sheet, and it all has this aesthetic to it, and it looks nice, but it is not easy to use. It's like streamlined too far. It's just kind of a mess. And that extends to, you know, weapon stats. Now it's just damage. Now armor is just, here's an armor rating. In Morrowind you had 3 different attacks, and certain weapons would be good at different attacks. So you could have a, you know, like a pole arm, and that's going to be better at thrusting. You're not going to get much out of it if you swing it. In Skyrim, you're just kind of bashing on that swing button, and if you have higher damage, it does more damage. So I don't think Skyrim is terrible, but it streamlines the Elder Scrolls experience so much that I feel like you lose all of what made it special in the first place. And there are RPGs in the same vein that do all of these things so much better. I don't think the questing is very good in this game. I don't think the combat is good at all. I don't think the character creation is interesting. I think the world is fun to run around in. I understand why this game was kind of a cultural phenomenon when it came out, but I don't think it stands the test of time in the same way that Morrowind does. And I'm saying that as someone who really liked Morrowind. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who do not think Morrowind stands the test of time, and that is totally fine. But my perspective, coming from someone who loved Morrowind, this just feels like a step back in basically every facet of game design. And it's depressing to me that a game that comes out 10 years later and has so much more money put into it, and talent and time, and it ends up a lesser experience, it's fascinating.